Welcome to this edition of World Business Commentary. My name is Belinda Boggs and my co-host is Kristen Ciccarello. Today's edition of our show is about the US dollar. There are a lot of news stories and commentary predicting the dollar's demise. Today we are going to talk about why the dollar is the world's reserve currency, what threats exist to the US dollar, and whether or not the dollar is poised to lose its status as the world's reserve currency. Kristen, can you give us a brief history lesson on the dollar? How did it become the world's reserve currency?
Sure. The US dollar essentially began in its current form when the Fed was created in 1913. At the time, the British pound was the currency most used for transactions around the world, and that continued until 1931 when the British abandoned the gold standard. The dollar became the currency of choice. It was officially crowned the world's reserve currency and was backed by the world's largest gold reserves thanks to the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944. Instead of gold reserves, other countries accumulated reserves of US dollars. Needing a place to store their dollars, countries began buying US Treasury securities, which they considered to be a safe store of money. The demand for Treasury securities, coupled with the deficit spending needed to finance the Vietnam War and the Great Society domestic programs, caused the United States to flood the market with paper money. With growing concerns over the stability of the dollar, the countries began to convert dollar reserves into gold.
Interesting. When that happened, didn't the dollar lose its status as the world's reserve currency?
No. While countries shifted out of US dollars at that time, President Richard Nixon was forced to intervene and de-link the dollar from gold, which led to the floating exchange rates that exist today. Although there have been rough periods of inflation for the dollar, about 60% of global foreign exchange reserves are held in dollars. About half of international trade is invoiced in dollars, and about half of all international loans and global debt securities are denominated in dollars. In foreign exchange markets, dollars are involved in nearly 90% of all transactions. By the way, for you out there watching on YouTube, if you like what you've heard so far, please subscribe to our channel and give us a big thumbs up.
Great. That was a great explanation. Now one thing I'd like to understand more. Can you explain briefly what the Bretton Woods Agreement is? How did this result in the US dollar becoming the world's reserve currency?
Of course. Before it entered World War II, the United States served as the Allies' main supplier of weapons and other goods. Most countries paid in gold, making the US the owner of the majority of the world's gold by the end of the war. This made a return to the gold standard impossible by the countries that depleted their reserves. In order to deal with this reality, delegates from 44 Allied countries met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, in 1944 to come up with a system to manage foreign exchange that would not disadvantage any country. The delegation decided that the world's currencies would no longer be linked to gold but could be pegged to the US dollar. That's because the greenback was itself linked to gold. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, the dollar is no longer linked to gold.
Excellent. Now, let's talk about threats to the US dollar. There are a lot of news stories about this, and they're all over the place. A quick Google search shows a number of conflicting headlines. Can you clear any of this up for us? Is the dollar going to lose its special status soon?
Great question. The reserve status is based largely on the size and strength of the US economy and the dominance of the US financial markets. Despite large deficit spending, US Treasury securities remain the safest way to store money. The trust and confidence that the world has in the ability of the United States to pay its debts keep the dollar as the most redeemable currency for facilitating world commerce. What can cause the US to lose its status? Can the adversaries of the United States do this? Can China or even Russia?
That's interesting. So, what do you think? Can Russia or China replace the dollar?
Anything can happen, but we need to understand exactly what would cause the US dollar to lose its dominance. And that is simple: people would need to lose faith in the ability of the United States to service its debt. The economy of the United States, including financial markets, would have to lose their current dominance. The biggest news story of late is that Saudi Arabia is in active talks with Beijing to price some of its oil sales to China in yuan instead of dollars. China would love to use its own currency to pay for oil.
So, isn't that a big deal? If Saudi Arabia agrees to this, I've heard this will end the dollar's dominance. Is this true?
To paraphrase a quote attributed to Mark Twain, the reports of the dollar's death are greatly exaggerated. Saudi Arabia hasn't agreed to this, and it may not be a great move for them since the dollar is their reserve currency. What are they going to do with Chinese currency? Saudi Arabia would end up with a bunch of yuan instead of dollars. Most other nations with which they would trade would want dollars to be the currency used for any deals they might make. Now, China would love to do this, because they can simply print yuan and buy much needed oil. But that won't hurt America. I think people are misunderstanding the situation. Neither China nor Russia nor any other single nation at the present time can change the dollar's status. What would change the dollar's status would have to be something within the US that would cause most of the world to lose its faith in the United States' ability to make good on its obligations. Then, another nation would become more trustworthy. We're nowhere near that. But it makes a good news story, and I'm happy to discuss it.
Great analysis. I tend to agree. But the US could end up crashing the dollar itself, right?
This is possible, and it's reasonable to assume at some point in the future, the dollar will lose its status. But to put this in perspective, the US economy makes up more than 20% of the world's economy, and this probably won't change soon. Here's a quote that sums up the current thinking on the US economy from Nikkei Asia. Quote, China's nominal gross domestic product is unlikely to surpass that of the US in the next few decades, the Japan Center for Economic Research said in an estimate, dropping a forecast last year that the world's two largest economies would switch places in 2033. So, could the dollar lose its dominance? Sure. But I wouldn't bet on it.
Great analysis. To summarize, the US dollar continues to be the world's reserve currency and the currency of choice for global transactions, because of the world's faith in the US, its economy, and its financial markets. This is unlikely to change soon, despite Russia and China's best efforts. That's our segment for today. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe and like this video if you enjoyed it.